following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is Not Therapy. I'm Liana and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for going good crazy. And this week, if I sound a little winded or wheezy, the wildflower smoke is really getting to me, so apologies for that. The show must go on. This week, we're going to talk about ghosting, an extremely lousy thing to do to someone that everyone experiences and most people do. Ghosting is a colloquial term that means abruptly ending all communication and avoiding contact with another person without any apparent warning or explanation and ignoring any subsequent attempts to communicate. Someone just vanishes, hence ghosting. Make sense? Okay. Kind of lengthy description of someone just vanishing off the face of the earth, right? No block. No, anything like that, just gone. Now, some people count blocking under ghosting. I don't, but this is not important. The important thing is, as I always say on this show, the exception to everything I'm about to say is situations of abuse. If someone's abusive, you are under no obligation to talk to them. In fact, you're under no obligation to talk to anybody. In fact, it's often better if someone has a tendency to be abusive that you go no contact. Now, to be clear, this isn't an excuse to exaggerate and claim that hurt feelings equal abusive behavior. Abuse isn't about never hurting someone's feelings. It's about being told to stop and not stopping, or manipulating, gaslighting, and robbing someone of choices they otherwise would have. If you ghost, you have to expect that to be permanent. No take-backs if you change your mind, unless you're prepared to hear about it, which is why fine in abusive situations, everything else, not so much. Ghosting someone as punishment for upsetting you is in itself potentially a form of abuse. This is a slippery slope. Don't assume someone who ghosts is deliberately punishing you. More common reasons for ghosting are that someone is avoiding direct conflict, they don't want to deal with your hurt feelings, they're just overwhelmed, and, the one everyone's afraid of, you're just not important enough to them to have the tough conversation, and that's the one that gets people. Now, that last one, not the most likely thing. It's usually a combination of these factors, which is why ghosting, even though it sucks, is so common. Now, it's also very common to feel rejection, guilt, grief, shame, and anger when you get ghosted. We'll talk about these later. But I'm giving you permission right now, if you stop listening right now, to treat the person who ghosted you like they're not worth that pain. They treated you like you weren't worth the conversation, so you can go right ahead and treat them like they're not worth the anguish. Easier said than done, though, right? It's not fair. You're right. It's not fair to just get ghosted. No one likes it. So, if it were a fair circumstance, people wouldn't do something that they don't like to other people. But unless, again, you were abusive, ghosting probably is not about you. Another big reason people ghost is that they're a chronic people pleaser, really bad people pleaser. And there's a certain point after which they can't keep up the act. And some people might attempt to blame you for that, but the other person's people pleasing is not on you. I really wish we'd stop calling this behavior people pleasing, frankly. And because I'd prefer to call the really toxic stuff what it actually is. Manipulation via acts of service, or a complete lack of boundaries. And, okay, I wasn't intending to go into people-pleasing this show, but let's do it briefly because ghosting makes a lot more sense in the context of what I'm about to tell you. Now, people-pleasing isn't a formally recognized term. You can't get diagnosed as a people-pleaser, even though therapists use the language to communicate with clients. It's generally understood, people-pleasing, as chronically putting other people's needs above your own, to the point that it's an act of self-harm. So people pleasing isn't just being nice. If you're being nice for the sake of nice and don't expect anything in return, that's just being nice. People pleasing is being nice at the pleaser's own expense, often to stave off some perceived disaster, get people to be super nice to them back. Or they claim they're terrified the other person will harm them if they say no or don't do what they want, so on and so forth. Now, this is the thing, right? Is that true? It's hard to tell from outside the relationship. Now, that idea, someone will harm me if I say no, right? That could be true. It could be an assumption that ends up being what I call manipulation via acts of service. Same as the whole, putting people's needs above their own to your own detriment. Now, it's a little easier to explain why that whole, being nice to get something out of the other person, and it gradually draining you. That's easy to see the manipulation in there, right? You're being nice to get people to do something you want, to control their behavior. In this case, you want them to be nice back instead of just being nice for the sake of being nice. And you might be sitting here going, but wait, everyone does that. Let me give you an example, okay? Scenario 1. Someone at work buys you a coffee once a week and remembers your order. In that situation, you're more inclined to think positively about that person and you'll want to work with them more. You'll think of them when it comes, hey, who'd you like on this project, right? That person is associated with positive things. Simple thing, buying a coffee once a week. Scenario 2, someone buys you coffee every day and you think, wow, that's really nice, above and beyond. But then you notice they start becoming passive aggressive and then they stop buying you coffee. And they start making surly comments like, it'd be nice if someone brought me a coffee sometime. And then you make sure you buy them at least one coffee because, well, not so subtle hint taken. But you're not more inclined to work with them now, are you? You're less inclined. You may describe them as moody or difficult. You're like, what's going on? That tends to be where people pleasing, as opposed to just being nice, ends up. Because someone is giving way a lot, expecting a desired effect or expecting to get it back. Then they start acting aggrieved when they don't get that desired effect, even when nobody's done anything wrong. The people pleaser doesn't have good boundaries in that situation and expects people to mind read. This is why it backfires and the people pleaser ends up more unhappy. The people pleasing system only works if other people please right back, right? That's why you buy that coffee under duress. You have to shower a people pleaser with attention, and that makes the people pleaser, reliant on something outside of their control. Even when other people do pay a bad people pleaser attention because it's under a certain amount of duress, it feels off and isn't satisfying for anybody. And in these situations of people pleasing, one or both parties will at some point just drift away, never having the conversation about what's wrong, sometimes because they don't have the words for it. And often the people pleaser can't see that they're being manipulative because they truly believe they're being nice. And so they get offended at any suggestion they're being coercive in any way. And so the person on the other end of that ghosts. We have ghosting. You see how it works? Now, the first scenario I talked about that fear, right? That's harder to tease out. That's a balancing act to show where manipulation can occur there. Because the fear some people pleasers experience is real. It's just not rooted in the person it's being directed at. So let's take a break and come back with that Do you have a story you think would be good for the show? Are you interested in sponsoring the show? Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website. At nottherapyshow on social media. How your people pleasing might be leading to ghosting on It's Not Therapy when we come back. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about ghosting. I am still Liana Kersner. Got my intro mixed up. Smoke, stuff. Yeah, wildfires. Anyway, ghosting. All the stuff that leads up to it and the fallout from it, right? Before the break, I was talking about how, the manipulations inherent to people-pleasing result often in ghosting. I'll have to do a whole people-pleasing episode soon. That's its own thing, right? But before the break, I promised to talk about another particular type of people-pleasing based on a fear of a person's negative reactions and how that leads to ghosting. It's not the intent of the extremely frightened person to be manipulative, but it does end up denying other people around them choices. And that's essentially the end result of manipulation. People have fewer choices than they would without that manipulative behavior. Now, in situations of abuse, again, which is where this type of fear comes from, an abused person ends up manipulating their abuser for survival. Now, that's not blaming the victim at all. Not suggesting anyone deserves to be abused. It's just a statement of fact. It's how it works. If an abused person was raised since childhood in an environment like that, they may believe that this behavior is normal or something everyone does. They might not like it. Like they consciously may go, this behavior, this constantly placating abusers, it doesn't feel good, but it's just the way of the world. And obviously that's going to cause problems in an otherwise healthy relationship, over and above the better known lingering impacts of the abuse. It's this nasty cycle of, yes, you were abused. You did nothing to deserve the abuse. You were the victim. Now there's big parts of your own behavior that you have to change. That is hard. That is a bitter pill to swallow as someone who had to do it right here, hence peer counseling. Now, this also applies to childhoods of neglect. Ironically, we tend to neglect talking about neglect in these discussions. Abuse gets a lot of attention. Neglect gets none. That's darkly funny. All right, moving on. It's obvious from the outside that someone is going to be deeply uncomfortable being close to anyone who is afraid of them no matter what they do. In the short term, the desire to fix someone by helping and supporting them through their fear can be appealing. But, there's a reason I can fix her or I can fix him is not healthy, or them, non-binary inclusive. As recognition dawns that the frightened person isn't going to be fixed, the fixer starts wondering how to get out of the entanglement that's formed trying to fix them without getting painted as a villain. They gradually realize that's not possible. The minute you try to fix someone, in that codependency forms, you try to pull away, you're going to be the bad guy. Because underlying the expressed fear, or maybe the expressed fear is a fear of abandonment. But at the core of this person's fear, the person who's still stuck in an abusive past, it's often not that you're going to hit them or even yell at them. Ever had a person go, stop yelling, and you weren't even raising your voice? Yeah, that's a weird feeling, isn't it? But for them, it's clearly very real. That's where the self-fulfilling prophecy comes in, right? There's a fear there. And it's rooted in something very real from their past The problem is it's very hard to work out what is actually going on because people in this particular constant state of fear or near constant state of fear have a very hard time with anything that remotely seems like conflict and anything that remotely sounds like criticism. And you can see at this point where an honest conversation is impossible because an honest conversation may sound a bit like conflict. It's probably going to have an element that sounds like criticism. And at this point, ghosting might seem like the best way to fail. So if you are aware that, you people please, or you do spend a lot of time afraid in relationships, and if you're getting ghosted again and again and again, it may be a good idea to consider therapy to address that fear. The reason I call this podcast It's Not Therapy is no podcast in the world can do that for you. It requires work. It's worth it. Trust me. I've been there. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to this fear-based people-pleasing and the manipulations inherent in it. But, I'm going to leave you hanging. That's not the topic of this episode. I'll tackle it later, maybe next week, the week after. For now, the topic is ghosting. And that's why I brought it up, because when, people are eventually going to go, this person's always afraid of me. It's unnerving. It's not getting better. And any attempt to talk about it just leads to some sort of freak out or meltdown. And so they just fade away. Now, if you recognize one of these patterns I've just mentioned, you're probably feeling quite blamed, quite criticized right now. I encourage you to, don't see it as your fault. See it instead as something that you have control over. You can change this. Now, it might be hard, but hear me out. You might find that it's actually not as hard as you're afraid it's going to be. Rejection sucks, no joke. But rejection hurts worse if you assign a value judgment to it instead of it being something that just happens sometimes. And that doesn't mean they go, okay, rejection happens, so it doesn't hurt anymore. No, it doesn't work that way. It hurts. It's disappointing. But you can choose to not add guilt or shame to the hurt and disappointment. It's okay to also be angry. Even feel like you've been mistreated, that it's not fair, as long as you don't retaliate. Because we're dealing with ghosting, retaliating isn't going to do any good and may possibly give the ghoster ammunition to construct a negative narrative about you. If you suspect that, there's something going on here, reality is going timey-wimey, maybe they're being punitive, proceed with caution. And seriously, retaliation is so overrated anyway. Retaliation might feel better very briefly, but there are always consequences. Retaliation is bad happy math. Setting boundaries is better. Having the difficult conversation before the person has ditched, good. Trying to have the conversation after the person is ditched, bad happy math. If you set appropriate boundaries throughout a relationship, either the ghosting happens so early that you haven't invested a ton of time and it's easier, right? Or it doesn't happen at all because you've established parameters where people talk about stuff. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be besties forever, but it does mean that at least you know what the problem is, right? A boundary that I think is a good idea to set in these cases, especially when someone expresses this intense fear, not of you, but, right? The boundary there is when that happens, back off fast. It's real simple. There are certain things, call them yellow flags if you like. I call them red flags. These are red flags for me in relationships. Something like this happens, then it's immediate. Okay, we got to have a talk. And the one is the fear thing. When someone goes, I'm afraid of you. Okay, hold up. What? Especially if it's on the internet. What? Let's talk about this. If they won't, back right off. Other things that are red flags for me, you can set your own. Someone telling you their entire mental health history right when they meet you socially. Nope. Backing right off. For me, anyway, not right. Someone looking to be protected as opposed to supported. It's the Samwise Gamgee rule. I can't carry it for you, Mr. Frodo. I can carry you, right? Somebody who's expecting you to do it for them, red flag for me. And I don't do that for other people either. I don't expect anybody to protect me as opposed to support me, right? Another red flag for me is someone who speaks about relationships, either romantic or platonic, like they're going on a shopping trip. Someone with the 666 or the I don't date guys over, this height or under this height, or I don't do this, I don't do that, when it's this checking boxes. Nope. We do not have the same values. Another red flag is like the Katy Perry song. Someone runs hot and cold. I don't even know the lyrics to that song. The dun-dun-dun-dun-dun, it's black and it's white, you're in and you're that's all I know of that song, right? But that song, that is about someone who is a red flag, right? I shouldn't call a whole person a red flag, but you know what I mean. Another thing for me, someone who has a pattern of getting sullen or unusually quiet and they won't tell me what's wrong, backing right off. Nope, we talk. See how it's all about communication, knowing what's going on? The problem is not conflict. The problem is a lack of information, right? Another red flag for me is someone who's had a series of turbulent relationships where everything is so great, then everything is so terrible, and they never seem to learn from this. When I have the conversations, maybe go slower or maybe ease up, and they're right in it again, and the disaster happens again. At some point, it's like, I'm tired of being in the blast radius. And also, people who repeatedly go on at venomous length about their abusive ex, terrible former friends, that kind of stuff, sometimes, depending on how they talk about it, even family members. If you're an adult and you're still complaining about your mom like you're some sort of teenager, I'm going to step back. Mentioning this stuff in passing is one thing, right? Or if it's sort of like, look, I've been trying not to talk about this, but that's different. But if it's constant, or if it happened years ago, and it seems like it happened yesterday, big step back. The reason I say be the hero of your own story and not anybody else's as a top 10 phrase is because of this. If people can't save themselves from their own circumstances, non-abusive, like I said, abuse is the caveat, but if somebody's still talking about a relationship that happened years ago and they don't have some sort of formal diagnosis that would explain why they're still stuck there, a formal diagnosis would be a good idea, or get space, right? It's easy to ignore your gut on these sorts of things, though. I have friends that, do one of these things. But if there's more than one of these things, no, usually not. It's easy to get roped in, though, right? Because people have their reasons. But remember, this is an episode on ghosting. It's specifically if you're tired of being ghosted, right? The best way to reduce the ghosting is to get, as the manosphere says, more picky, right? I prefer the term more discerning or set better boundaries. But no matter what you call it, if you practice gently rejecting people, sparing their feelings, like saying no, saying not now, saying I can't, being gentle, being considerate, but being honest. If you practice that skill, when someone ghosts you, it's easier to deal with because you're treating people better than the ghoster is treating you right now, right? But yeah, learning to spot people pleasers and reducing your own people pleasing, these to me are the best two ways to get ghosted a lot less. And avoid the superficial people, for God's sakes. I shouldn't have to say that, but hey, even with all of that though, even with the best boundaries, ghosting still happens. It still happens to me. It happened to me recently. So why does it suck so much, right? And what to do about it if we've been ghosted and we're working through the awful feelings that it inspires. More on that after this break. Questions, comments, concerns, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website at Not Therapy Show. On social media, ghosting, how to recover from it on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back and It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking about ghosting. What to do if it happens to you? Well, it's easy to say, just get over it or just move on. It's very hard for a lot of people to move on without answers regarding what went wrong, which is exactly what ghosting denies the ghosted, which is why I spend so much time on the connection of people pleasing, because if in doubt, assume the ghoster is a people pleaser who just couldn't keep up the act anymore. They couldn't say no, so they became a non-entity. But any time, under any circumstance, that a person is there, then not there, whether they move away, whether they die, God forbid, there's a feeling of loss, and ghosting is no different. That person was in your life and they're not there anymore, There's a feeling of loss, a feeling of grief. Loss hurts. There's no completely avoiding that in life. What you can avoid is the self-blame. You can avoid telling yourself a story that it was somehow your fault. Now, being conscientious and wanting to improve, that's great. But ghosting is a situation where the ghoster deliberately did not want to tell you anything you can improve on. So it's real simple. Now hear me out. Honor that intent. Seriously. They deliberately did not tell you what the problem was. So there's no problem. Don't think anything more about it. It wasn't you. It was them. Because no amount of wishing it were otherwise is going to get you an explanation. And trust me, if you did get an explanation, it would not be satisfactory. Learn from my experiences, okay? This is a hard thing for people to get their heads around, because they think I'm cool and they're not, and it's not true. I'm not very cool. Like, honestly, that's why I do this. I'm not cool at all. I've just been through a lot, so learn from my experiences, mistakes, and struggles. And it's a struggle. The idea that someone you like didn't think you were worth an explanation. It feels dehumanizing and devaluing, right? Because it is dehumanizing and devaluing. Somebody, for whatever reason, you just weren't worth it. And that's why it's about the ghoster, not the ghostee. That's why ghosting is a lousy thing to do, because maybe some people would be, I wouldn't want to know. All right, fine. And sometimes maybe that does make sense if the relationship is like not that deep. Okay, fair, whatever. But for deep friendships, for romantic relationships, even dating sites, like please have the courtesy to send someone a message to just close the door. Now, some experts suggest if you've been ghosted, if you're the ghostee, they suggest sending the ghoster a message, actively closing the door, like, hey, it's been great talking to you, but I'm going in another direction. Peace, thanks. Yeah, no, I don't find that helps, because you do that at a party. If he's like, what if they're like, no, don't go, it was a mistake, right? That's what you're hoping for when you do that, right? So don't. Especially these days when the ghoster can show all their friends, air quotes, that message and refer to it as creepy or pathetic, or just don't. Silence is best. If they're not treating you like you're worth communication, they're not worth communication either. Real simple. You don't owe them anything, but you do owe yourself better treatment than the ghoster gave you, and that is within your control. You can treat yourself better than the ghoster did. So find a new social activity, spread some positivity somewhere, play a favorite video game, listen to music, go to a movie, right? Pay some people honest compliments, engage in good energy. Not the negativity and dehumanization, devaluing inherent in ghosting. In fact, continuing to work on your socializing, even when your social group's pretty good, you're pretty happy, going out every so often and just meeting new people, that's a great way to make ghosting hurt less. When you have other people to focus on, when there's sort of social hope, then that one person who disappeared means less. It really does work. And, if you are stung, it's okay to reach out to friends, talk about the situation, actively ask for some words of support. It can mean a lot to be reminded of why your friends value you. That can really help offset the devaluation that comes from ghosting, right? But if you're still stuck and you've been ghosted, this might be time to work on your self-esteem and how you talk to yourself. Sparing yourself unnecessary emotional brutality is a really good goal to have. Beating yourself up isn't motivating, trust me. And assuming things are your fault leads to false positives, trust me, right? And false positives in assumptions lead to bad choices. Now, this might feel like you're letting yourself off the hook at first, but take it from me, you're not, right? In this case, you're just accepting reality, that you're never going to know what happened, and speculating isn't going to help. That's not thinking positively. That's thinking realistically. If there's something that you feel after this experience you're going to do differently for your own good, that's useful. All those red flags I mentioned earlier, that's where they came from. Like, nope, that was on me. I saw that. Brain went itchy, and I ignored it, right? But trying to mind read someone who ditched is just going to make you bad crazy. It's nice to be wanted. It is. We're wired, want to be wanted. Social acceptance is one of those things, humans, right? But sometimes people we like, even people we've done a lot for, there's a lot of history there, right? Sometimes they ghost. I've been ghosted by literal family members. And then I had third parties tell me that, the ghoster, they've been talking about me and they'd really like, and that's when it comes, oh, I'd really like you. She'd really like you to meet her daughter and she'd really like to work it out, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but they never reach out themselves. And I sure as heck don't reach out to them, right? Because let's face it, you do that, the likelihood is that these people will just ghost again. And I choose not to be treated that way. Top 10 phrase. Other people don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them. Every time one of these third-party conversations comes up, I'm like, yeah, they know who I am. Because they're the ones not reaching out. Oh, they're always meaning to third parties, but they don't send a text. I know how simple texting is. I can do it, right? It's about them. It's not about me. Because Okay, that entire scenario with my family, it's ridiculous, right? But I swear to you, it's totally true. And that one's been going on for years. Literal family members will talk about me, not to me, and other people think this is totes okay. Now, you're in my shoes, right? Would you think this person was serious when they keep telling third parties that they'd like to reconcile, but they never reach out themselves? Okay, here's the thing. In that moment, I actually believe they mean it in that moment. They're just too cowardly, maybe guilt-ridden, to actually take the step, to actually be an adult and do anything about it. There's something there that's in them. And they're going to third parties because they want someone, remember I said, red flag, someone trying to be protected, right? They want somebody to make things 100% safe for them. They want to have people come to them so they can feel special and safe with no negative consequences for their behavior. Because, of course, if you approach them, you have to be nice, right? Thing is, that doesn't help them in life. That's not the behavior of a full grown-up. And that's why every expert on the subject of ghosting says, again, ghosting is about the ghoster, not the person who got ghosted. You see it in that absolutely absurd example from my own life. Now, if you need more persuading after that, try to put yourself in the situation that happened right before the ghosting, right? Would you have just disappeared without a word? Maybe you would, because it's trendy some days. Like I said, a lot of people do it because, yeah, sometimes the other person just not worth it. But accept what you're doing there. I know I've been told that ghosting is what you're supposed to do to be polite in some professional and social circumstances. To me, that's a marker of toxicity. You know, I don't like somebody messaging again and again and again and, you know, having hope because, you know what, I really appreciate people's, you know, tenacity with that. And they deserve to be rewarded with an answer, even if it's a negative one. Because you can give a little reassurance. You can give a little motivation in the answer. Give them an honest reason why it's not going to work out right now. Right? You want your mind blown? Some of the people who advocate ghosting, some of the people that have ghosted me, they're licensed therapists. And does that make them a bad therapist? No. No, of course not. Therapists are human. Most humans ghost. So in our final segment, I'm going to give you some alternative reasons for ghosting based on real experiences again to give you an alternative to I just wasn't worth a response. Because even though sometimes that's true, it might not be true and you'll never know. You get to pick. You get to pick what you believe when there is nothing, right? So I'll get to those alternatives so that you can be happier and good crazy instead of bad crazy after the break. Questions, comments, concerns, suggestions for another topic, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website, at nottherapyshow on social media. When we come back, last segment on ghosting on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We are still talking about ghosting, why it hurts, why people do it, and what to do about it. I gave some motivations off the top of the show. You know, people avoiding conflict, overwhelm, fear, dealing with other people's negative emotions. Now, those motivators, what's happening inside the person, lead to manifesting as a large number of behaviors that you can observe, that I can observe, that people can observe, right? And hearing alternative reasons to that dreaded, I just wasn't worth it to them, can help you see that, you know, framing things in the most negative possible regard, that's not doing anything for you. Telling yourself alternate stories, what ifing, using that what if brain for good instead of evil. This can help you see why there's no need to blame yourself when there are many, many other options. This is a technique that's an alternative to thought stopping. It's using that fact that we do like certainty even when it's not real. So if you're like, oh, they hate me now. They thought I wasn't worth it. Okay, what else could it be? Right? Because there are many, many other options. One, a big one, a very common one, is plain old anxiety and depression. Now, someone can fake well for short periods of time, but that person could be so depressed and anxious that they have trouble sending and responding to messages, even leaving the house. You'd be amazed at how often somebody does want to stay in contact with someone, but they just can't send the text or the DM or whatever, right? It's not even a call anymore. And you can say, oh, maybe that means I should reach out. No, they have to learn. For their own sake, they have to learn to do this. They have to address that crippling anxiety and depression. It's not your responsibility. It's not you. Be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. You cannot save them from that. Another one that's connected, but not quite the same, is catastrophic thinking and low self-esteem. Now, even if somebody can communicate, they'll be in a relationship and it's going great, and suddenly they get intrusive, catastrophic thoughts. They start thinking about past relationships that didn't work out. So they ghost before they can make mistakes that make you hate them. And I know this sounds bizarre, right? It makes no sense, but it's called disordered thinking for a reason. Take my word on this. This is what people have said, why they bailed out of perfectly good relationships, right? Another one is plain old guilt, right? And that's something different than overwhelm. When I was in high school, I got overwhelmed. I remember this one guy. He was a super nice guy, but I was just like super overwhelmed. And I don't even know what brain just went. And, you know, he was actually somebody that I reconnected on Facebook. It's like, hey, I was lousy to you there. Because it was no one's fault. Right. And that was just, I didn't know what to do. I was really freaking young. Home life was a disaster. I was frankly afraid of anybody being exposed to my father. And, you know, I don't think I ever told anybody that until this moment. There you are. Confession on It's Not Therapy. But guilt, I mean, maybe there'd be an element of guilt there, right? Because if he started abusing them the way he abused me, I was the one that brought them into it. So I kept my distance. You know, whatever is going on, there's something in that person they can't bring themselves to tell you. And so they just get distant, they disappear. And again, you know, based on my own example, that's not on you. In my case, it wasn't a resolvable issue at that time. Sometimes it is. But either way, that's a them problem. That's not a you problem. In a true case of abuse like I was in, nobody could save me from that in that moment. The people that could, you know, weren't doing it. And nobody outside of direct witnesses had any power there, right? Them problem, not a you problem. Now, this is an example of, you know, an overlapping reason. Back then, I wasn't capable of really being a complete friend, right? I wasn't dating anybody because I couldn't, like, it was just, no. Okay, it was high school. Who cares? In retrospect, you know, whatever. But it wasn't right. And stepping back is the right call there. And I wish I could say I made that consciously, but it was more instinctive, right? No, it'd be nice to let you know when somebody's doing that. Yeah, but like I said, I didn't really have the thoughts there. I didn't have the words. Some people can't admit it to themselves. So they just disappear, you know? And it's amazing. People have come back after disappearing. And I said, look, I get it. I really would have appreciated a short message just to let you know what was going on. And they blast me with, I was working on my mental health. I did what I had to do for my mental health. And clearly they had not worked hard enough based on that reaction, right? Like, whoa. And because of all these experiences I've just shared with you on this program, I've developed the thinking that unless someone tells me I'm the problem, I'm going to actively assume I'm not. You'll recognize that in the top 10 phrase, don't let problems that aren't your fault lead to mistakes that are. Also, again, be the hero of your own story and not anyone else's. I wasted so much time in the past being afraid the problem was me. And even when the problem was me, it wasn't for the reasons I thought, right? No matter how much I worried, no matter how much I stressed, I was caught completely off guard by what people ended up accusing me of. It's impossible to predict what's going on in other people's brains. And mature adults give you the chance to correct your behavior before it's a point of no return, before you can't fix it. And if they don't, I can't say this enough, that is on them, not you. They made the choice not to tell you. So all you can do is get on with your life. Ironically, even if they did think you just weren't worth it, that means they're not worth the agony. They're not worth the second guessing. Okay. But what if you just absolutely are stuck on this idea of worth? Okay, let's say they're right. You just weren't worth it to them. That doesn't mean you don't have worth to other people. In fact, I guarantee you that you have worth to someone. And those people are worth more to you because they stuck around. All right? This idea of worth can be very, very subjective, and we can end up in a reinforcing spiral of misery when we get stuck in letting other people define our worth for us because we're afraid of arrogance or folly if we, take that step to decide for yourself that they're wrong. You do have worth. You were worth that conversation. Just because they didn't do it doesn't mean that you weren't worth it, right? You were. They made a mistake. They messed up. No matter what you did, that wasn't the way to handle it, right? I'll leave you with that. Questions, comments, any feedback whatsoever. Liana at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com is the website if you can't remember how to spell my name. Or at nottherapyshow on social media. Thanks for taking this journey with me. I am not ghosting you now. That's why I do a send-off. Remember, your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next time.